you listening closely? Do you know the story of Narcissus? Well, I'm going to tell you about it. Narcissus was a man who was so in love with himself that he fell in love with his own reflection. No one else was good enough for him. He stared into the pool and eventually wasted away. But that's not the true story. When Narcissus was born, his mother, Liriope, took him to the blind seer Tiresias and asked him for a prophecy. Will he have a long life? Before Tiresias became a prophet, he had spent 7 confusing years as a woman and made 2 important discoveries about women. First, that women get more pleasure from lovemaking than men. When he told this discovery to Hera and Zeus, Hera, in rage, struck him blind, which led to his second discovery. Not all women want to hear this. Zeus tried to make up for his blindness by giving him the power to know the future. So Tiresias gave Liriope his cryptic prophecy. He'll have a long life, as long as he never knows himself. Now what could that mean? The story you know is that Narcissus was so beautiful that everyone wanted to be with him, but he rejected them all. No, 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 not good enough. One rejected lover was furious and begged Nemesis, the goddess of vengeance, for retribution. If Narcissus ever falls in love, don't let the love be returned. Nemesis heard the prayer and caused Narcissus to fall in love with himself. He was led to a pool of water, and when he looked into it, he fell in love with what he saw. And what he saw wasn't real, so of course it couldn't love him back. But Narcissus sat patiently forever, hoping that one day the beautiful person in the bottom of the pool was going to come out and love him. You should take note of this first easy lesson. If no one ever seems right for you, and then the one person who does seem right for you doesn't want you, the problem isn't that person. The problem is you. What have you learned so far? Do you think you've understood? You heard the story, you heard the words, but your mind unheard it and replaced it with something else. Even after I tell you this, you'll have trouble remembering it. You think Narcissus was so in love with himself that he couldn't love anyone else. But that's not what happened. The story clearly tells it in the reverse. He never loved anyone, and then he fell in love with himself. Do you see? Because he never loved anyone, he fell in love with himself. That was Narcissus' punishment. You thought Narcissus rejected all those people because he was in love with himself? But he rejected them all before he loved himself. Loved himself? Do you think Narcissus rejected them because he thought he was better than them? Or better looking? How would he have known he was so beautiful? He didn't even recognize his own reflection. He rejected all those people because they loved him. You thought Nemesis meant enemy. You thought it meant the person who always opposes you. The one you struggle most against. A person who is something like you, but the opposite. But all of those explanations are your lies working to hide the truth. A nemesis is the one who makes you fall in love with yourself. Without Nemesis, there'd be no story of Narcissus. Without your Nemesis... Some people have tried to say that the pool Narcissus stared into was magical, that it tricked him, put a spell on him, made it impossible for him to look away. But that's wishful thinking. It would be wonderful to be able to blame the pool the way a man blames a woman for tempting him. No. The truth is that no magic was necessary. Nemesis had only to lead Narcissus to an ordinary pool, and Narcissus would punish himself. What did Narcissus do when he saw something beautiful in that pool? He fantasized and dreamed all the different possibilities of that person, all the things that person could be to him. He didn't stay there for years because the reflection had pretty hair. He stayed because daydreaming takes a lot of time. And as Ovid described about someone else, but his great love increased with neglect. His miserable body wasted away, wakeful with sorrows. Leanness shriveled up his skin, and all his lovely features melted as if dissolved upon the wafting winds. Nothing remains except what? What do you think remains? Maybe the answer is different for everyone, but I know what you hope the answer is. Anything else besides nothing. This is a strange story. You know the main character is Narcissus, yet the title is Echo and Narcissus. Why do you think Echo is only a minor character? Who made Echo a minor character? Echo was a nymph with a beautiful voice, but she talked too much, so Hera cursed her to be able to only repeat the words someone else said first. Oh, I can hear you say it. That's where the word echo comes from. Grow up. Do you think these are children's stories? Like how the leopard got his spots? These aren't fairy tales. These are warnings. Echo fell madly in love with Narcissus. She followed him, chased him, wished for him, but he wanted no part of her, rejected her cruelly. Even after Narcissus died, she longed for him, losing herself to the love, eventually wasting away into nothing but a voice. He probably was right to reject her. What kind of a woman loves a man based entirely on how he looks? What kind of a woman still loves a man no matter how badly he treats her? Why would Narcissus want that kind of a person? She wasn't a woman with a beautiful voice. There was nothing inside her except a voice. But let's go back to the beginning of the story. No, the true beginning of the story. Or do you think this is a dream that starts in the middle? If it was, we'd have to interpret it as a wish fulfillment and not as a warning. At the beginning, Echo was watching him, hidden, but Narcissus sensed someone was there, and he was excited by it. "Come!" he called. "Come!" she could only echo, and stayed hidden, which only made him want her more. What mystery is this? He couldn't see her, but he could hear her voice, and in that unfathomable voice was incarnated all the possible loves he could imagine. It helped that this mysterious woman knew just what to say to him. She was perfect for him in every way. She was the cause of his desire. And then she came out from hiding, and he saw her. Was she beautiful? Undoubtedly. But the moment he saw her, he retched. "Bleh! Better death than should you have all of me." What was so wrong with her? It wasn't just that she may have been shorter or heavier than he had imagined. What was wrong with her was that in the instant he experienced her, she stopped being anything else. But if Echo was no longer a projection, she was still a reflection. Echo, like all women, offered her man a peek inside his soul. All he had to do was look. What kind of a man am I that attracts this kind of woman? What kind of a man am I that attracts the kind of woman who only likes me for how I look, despite how I treat her? What kind of a man am I that only attracts the kind of woman who likes me for X? Is it because there is nothing else of value inside me except X? But he was never taught to ask questions like this. In fact, he was taught never to ask questions like that. What kind of a man attracts a woman who can only echo him? There must be a name for that kind of person, and he already had it. If he had considered this, he might have tried to change himself, or at least recognize how similar they were. And just as Echo wasted away to her ex, a voice, he wasted away to a pretty flower, his ex. Nothing besides remained. How is it that centuries later, Tiresias' prophecy is still not understood? Tiresias' prophecy was, "He will have a long life, as long as he never knows himself." What could that mean? Oh, he was right. Narcissus did live a long life, though not a happy one. He spent his life alone, dreaming and gazing into the pool, waiting to die. But Tiresias' prophecy seems wrong, counter to the Greek spirit, an affront to logic. Shouldn't knowing thyself be the highest virtue? He'll have a long life, as long as he never knows himself. But it's so simple. The explanation. It's so simple that no one has ever thought of it. And the reason no one has thought of it is that it is too terrible to think about. Forget about whether the prophecy is true. Ask instead, what would the parents have done once they heard it? When Laius and Jocasta were told that Oedipus would eventually destroy them, they pinned his ankles and abandoned him in the woods, ensuring that he'd someday have cause to do it. And so, when Narcissus' parents heard the requirements for their child's long life, they would have done everything possible to ensure that he didn't know himself. No one knows what Liriope and Cephasus did, but whatever they did, it worked. He didn't even recognize his own reflection. That's a man who doesn't know himself. That's a man who never had to look at himself from the outside. How do you make a child know himself? You surround him with mirrors. This is what everyone else sees when you do what you do. This is who everyone thinks you are. You cause him to be tested. You were good at this, but not at that. This other person is better than you at this, but not better than you at that. These are limits by which you are defined. Narcissus was never allowed to meet real danger, glory, struggle, honor, success, failure, only artificial versions manipulated by his parents. He was never allowed to ask, am I a coward? Am I a fool? To ensure his boring longevity, his parents wouldn't have wanted a definite answer in either direction. He was allowed to live in a world of speculation, a fantasy of someday and what if. He never had to hear too bad, too little, or too late. When you want a child to become something, you first teach him how to master his impulses, how to live with frustration. But when a temptation arose, Narcissus' parents either let him have it or hid it from him so he wouldn't be tempted, so they wouldn't have to tell him no. They didn't teach him how to resist temptation, how to deal with lack, and they most certainly didn't teach him how not to want what he couldn't have. They didn't teach him how to want. The result was that he stopped having desires and instead desired the feeling of desire. Nemesis had an easy job. She only had to work backwards, show him something that didn't return his love, and he'd be hooked. Narcissus' parents were demigods. Didn't they know how to raise a good son? What a proper parent needs to do? Yet they listened to a charlatan anyway. They were giving meaningless information by a supposed expert and abandoned all common sense, and so created a monster who brought death to at least one person and misery to all. I know what you're thinking. You're worldly, you're cynical, you're skeptical. You don't go for all this fake crap. You're thinking whether it is true that not loving others comes before loving only yourself. It seems backwards to you. You're thinking, what does this little girl know, really? She didn't write this story after all, did she? You're thinking whether it is true that parents create the narcissism that plagues their children for the rest of their lives. Does that match your own experience? You're trying to remember back to your own childhood. Am I right? Which means you haven't learned the lesson. There you go again, thinking about yourself. Your impulse wasn't to say, am I doing this to my kids? Or, how will I act differently? It was to wonder about your own nature. The moral of the story Narcissus told as a warning for the very people who refuse to hear it as such is that how Narcissus came to be is irrelevant. What was important was what he did, and what he did was nothing. I'm being told that I should stop here, but let me tell you one more thing. There's a secret to the story. Close your eyes. Imagine the scene as a large picture on the wall. There's Narcissus, sitting by the pool, head tilted downwards, arms idly twirling the water, his mind lost in daydreams. Around him are the trees, the grass, and the sky. Nemesis is behind him, arms crossed, watching the punishment. Now look closely at the expression on Nemesis's face. There's something odd there. Look closely at her eyes. She's not actually looking at Narcissus. It only looks like she's looking at Narcissus. She's actually looking right back at you. That's right. The story isn't about Narcissus. It was always about you. There never was a safe distance for you to watch from. It was all a kind of charade. The ancients didn't tell these stories to pass the time, or to teach children lessons, or to tell you where the word echo comes from. Do you think we took their pop culture and made it into our literature? These stories were meditations, case studies. What do you see in them? The secret of the story Narcissus is that the story is the pool. It is your pool. What do you see in it? It's a reflection and a projection. But you know the old saying, when you stare into the pool stares also into you. What does the pool see when it stares into you? How does it judge you? Look behind you. Nemesis is there. Can you guess what your punishment will be? Open your eyes. You've been given a second chance. None of this is real.
At least you all still look like you.